Welcome back to Cinematic. I'm Ryan. I'm doing my best to get these out on Fridays, by the way, if not Saturday, just at the very least weekly, and I'm doing poorly, but I'm gonna keep trying. I know regularity is the way to a viewer's heart, but the struggle continues. So keep coming around. I promise these will be out fairly regularly, if not weekly. Because I like talking about movies, that's why I'm here. It's almost like I can't not talk about them. I like to share the things that I find out about movies as well, because I've got some big black holes, even having gone to film school and all that. Like, you just can't see them all, which I'm really coming to terms with in my old age. But also, you're just always going to have blank spots. So as I continue to fill in those blank spots, I become characteristically excited about them, and I just got to tell somebody. So you're that somebody, and thanks. This is maybe the best introduction I've done for this series ever. We're watching a bunch of action films for season 1, and that's started out, I mean, I guess technically, chronologically, it started out in Japan with Zatoichi. I think that was kind of the earliest film that I did. And straight into Hong Kong action from there, and have heavily been involved in that since. But now that we're inching out into the States, in fact, we're not inching anymore. We're just fully enveloped in what the States kind of did with Hong Kong action, or at least the action movie genre, more or less. And if you've been around for some of those episodes, you know that sometimes they're up to the quality of a Hong Kong action in one way or another, sometimes not. And as always, you can check out the list over on Letterboxd, is where that resides. And it is incomplete as titled, but also ever-changing. I think I added a new one after this week too that we'll talk about. So either way, again, thanks for being along for the ride. This week we're going to talk about American Ninja 5, which I think this episode is going to mostly be a series of rabbit holes. That seemed to be the way I tackled this one, which happens with these, again, as I get excited and I'm like, oh, this guy's from this and this and does and whatever. This one didn't have so much of this guy's from this. Like, I hadn't seen, I think, most of these people in a thing before, with maybe one major exception that I'll get to. But I think it's way past due that Canon Films entered the fight. You cannot visit the VHS shelf without paying tribute to Canon Films in some way. The Ninja Trilogy, Cobra, Superman, for the Quest for Peace, Bloodsport, Masters of the Universe, and the American Ninja franchise. American Ninja 5, which is the movie we're going to talk about this week, is actually towards the end of Canon Films, as it were, and nobody has the time to tell you an entire story about Canon Films. So let me just tell you two, since this is kind of where we were at the time, and also how they ended up. I think there was some sort of a resurrection after the point. In fact, there might still be a canon in some way, like somebody's got the name at some point. It is doing something with it now, since it is kind of reverenced, I'll say it, sure, in a way, but this is what was going on in 1993. It says Canon ran out of money to continue production on Walker, Texas Ranger, also they were doing, by the way, due to the indictments of funding partner Banca Nacional del Laboro, then embroiled in a scandal over unauthorized loans to Iraq. And producers were desperately trying to raise money to complete the miniseries. CBS stepped in and helped them out. But when Canon sold to VMI Acquisitions Inc. later in '94, it says the owners did settle some of the outstanding debts, but shortly afterwards, a group of creditors, including Charles Bronson and Every Vision Inc., sued Canon Pictures to force it into bankruptcy. So, love somehow that Charles Bronson really death-wished Canon Pictures, films, video into oblivion. But not before American Ninja 5 could be put out. Direct-to-video, and there's nothing quite like starting with the 5th in a franchise, meaning that at least 4 times before, I thought I was going to talk about an American Ninja movie and found one reason or another not to. So happy to say that there's no reason at all why I shouldn't spend an entire episode talking about American Ninja 5. Which turns out actually didn't start as an American Ninja movie anyways, I guess. I think American Dragons was the working title for a while. Even though it does share an awful lot of DNA namely the actor David Bradley, who replaced Michael Dudikoff, which is another name you'll hear, and should. What a name, what a last name, Dudikoff. Bradley replaced him as the American Ninja in the third, and then I think they teamed up in the fourth. And they're both good at what they do. Like, if anybody tries to tell you that David Bradley is no Michael Dudikoff, you tell them, yes, he is. He is exactly a Michael Dudikoff. And maybe better, actually, because he is... I know Dudikoff didn't have any training before the movies. I don't know, like, how steeped in it. And again, I haven't seen him, so I don't know how well he does with the choreography or martial arts in American Ninja 1, 2, 4. But David Bradley was a black belt in Shotokan Karate, Taekwondo, and then the internet just says Kung Fu, Aikido, and weapons. So I don't know how far that particular rabbit hole goes. But I will say, on camera, he does look like he knows what he's doing. Like, none of the choreography's particularly complicated or long, but he looks good doing it. So he either spent enough time off camera or for the movie, I don't know. Maybe he's one of those that's, I should have looked him up, is still doing it. I feel like that's a common denominator amongst actors or martial artists that went into acting, you know, that were martial artists first. Like, they're still doing it. You know, a lot of the Art of Action episodes, Gary Daniels stands out. Also, of course, Richard Norton. Like, they still talk about their routine, their daily routines as far as martial arts goes. So don't know if David Bradley was one of those, but I can tell he did enough that the choreography looks good when he does it. And speaking of which, the choreography is another rabbit hole all on its own. And I will say, credited up front, and should be, from what I understand, Tadashi Yamashita, who is a Okinawan, basically grew up mostly there, and earned his black belts at a very young age. I think began practicing at 11, black belted at 16 at the very least, and eventually, I think he's a 10th Dan at this point. So 60 plus years he's been at it, but even by this point, he was well established. I guess in cinema as well, he's only got 20 something credits, so he's not like insane like the next guy I'm gonna mention, but most of those I think he showed up as Bronson Lee. And if it's not because he looks like a Japanese Charles Bronson, then I don't know what to tell you. And he's in this movie. He's in American Ninja 5. He plays Joe's friend. David Bradley's character is Joe Castle, and Tadashi is one of his friends. I think, not strictly speaking a sensei, and he's only in it for a second because there is a sensei in this film. But before that, we cut to the enemies, and poof, James Liu is in the picture, plays Viper. And yes, I mainly remember him as this guy. That is a bit in Hot Shots Part 2 where it's just Charlie Sheen is in some sort of a blood sport situation and he's the other guy that gets his stuff rocked. You win. Like, have seen that enough, that 2-second scene enough times to recognize him in another movie. But turns out I could have said that about almost 200 other things for James Liu. Grew up in South Central LA studying martial arts, so like kind of already like destined to be in the business. Lots of stunts, lots of choreography. I guess his big break was when John Carpenter hired him to do the martial arts choreography for Big Trouble in Little China. But he's also been a henchman like 100 times over in all of these things. In fact, I may have, speaking of adding movies to the list, added the only thing he, I'm going to say wrote and directed. Yeah, wrote and directed, and judging by some of these photos, it looks like Tadashi. Okay, I don't know if these are all from the movie. If these are all from the movie, then Chris Tucker and Pat Morita and Robin Shou might be in this as well. I don't know, but added 18 Fingers of Death to the list, so we'll see how far that goes. That's in 2006, so we were not going to talk about that for a bit anyway. Next up, the actual sensei in the film is Pat Morita. They literally got Pat Morita.
Joe, we gotta talk.
Watch Karate Kid too many times and it still seems weird. He brings with him his nephew, his grandnephew, in fact, who is
a little ninja man.
A possible Karate Kid, if you will. And then Pat Morita also poof vanishes. Like when I'm going to use the active voice poof here, I'm not just like he entered and left the movie. No, there's like a cloud of smoke. James Liu, Viper, does it while the bad guys are talking, and I think one of them just yells. I've got to put it in here.
Get me the Viper!
There's going to be a lot of me just putting the clips straight in because, spoiler, they're pretty fun. But James Blue just poof out of nowhere. And then Pat Morita, when he's done talking to Joe, also just poof, but also from like inside of a dojo. So pretty neat trick, honestly.
How'd he do that?
And strangely enough, did communicate to me that him and Viper were from the same clan. And he does kind of mention that. He says his nephew is the last of the clan. So yes, poof, Pat Morita disappears and the grandnephew is left with Joe, with the American Ninja. And we basically have one of those movies where it's like the adult and the kid and they're at odds, and there's a million of these out there. Maybe is Temple of Doom kind of the exemplar, Dr. Jones, maybe? I don't know. My favorite is probably where the whole thing is parodied kind of at the same time. It's in Last Action Hero where they pretty much call it out. In fact, they go into, once they're in the movie, they go into the precinct and like every cop is getting assigned a ridiculous partner of some sort. There's like a cartoon in there and everything. What a fantastic movie. And that's not where the similarities to other things end, let's say. It's not where they begin either, for that matter. The plot itself consists of an evil rich guy, Glock, played by Clement von Frankenstein. And I don't know if that's how you actually pronounce it, but he was in Young Frankenstein amongst so many other things. Said he was often low down on the cast list or uncredited, but I don't even, it's just, again, another one. Go check out his particular rabbit hole on IMDb and just be amazed because you've probably seen him before doing something. Like never, I can't point to any one thing and be like, he's the guy from this, because I don't think he was ever that front and center. Could be wrong, but just been in so many things, and probably because of how good of a job he does again in this. He is just consummately that evil rich guy here who, in this case, and again, this also sounds familiar, has employed a well-meaning scientist in Dr. Strobel, who unwittingly develops a lethal nerve agent that Glock can sell to an evil Latin American General Zubino. And again, I've either seen that plot before or it's just so perfectly amalgamated. When it's not full-on approximating stuff that you have seen before.
Got me there, kid.
It even has that kid practicing karate against the setting sun on a beach. You know, it all looks pretty familiar. They don't go all the way to a crane kick, but they don't have to, honestly. And speaking of which, the kid, Lee Reyes, by the way, hasn't done much else, but I feel like I shouldn't just keep calling him the kid. His character's name is Hero in the movie. But despite all of that, or maybe because of it, I did still find a new level of appreciation for this thing. Nobody's surprised. But first, say what you will about lower budget stuff, you know the effects are going to be practical. You know that explosion is real. That guy's actually on fire. And since they did most of the location filming in Venezuela, if I understand correctly, somebody probably got hurt. Not that that's like the goal or anything, but it does feel spiritually tied to Hong Kong action in that way, you know, that they've broken some of the rules, if not themselves, and got something entirely unique on film because of it, something that you don't quite see anymore. And the second thing, which is also like Hong Kong action for that matter, I feel like the stuntmen are running the show with this movie, you know, like Tadashi Yamashita, like James Liu, but also the director, Bobby Jean Leonard, or Bob Bralver, as he's also credited, is another stalwart. He's been a stuntman or a stunt coordinator for at least 200 other movies and TV shows since 1966. So it all kind of has this knock-on effect that makes it feel like a way more honest snapshot of not only movies like this, but movies at the time. You know, you can point to a Schwarzenegger movie and it's fantastic, it's amazing, whatever, but you don't watch that and feel like you got a true, you know, much of that is meant to be invisible. Much of the movie making is meant to be invisible. Here, you see these guys and you're like, oh, they just showed up for work today and this is what they did. It just feels more real in that way. And I don't even think I'm grasping at straws at this point. I just think that's legitimately enjoyable to watch. But is the movie any good? Somebody's yelling at their screen at this point. Yeah, sure, it is some good. There's no way it needs to be an hour and 42 minutes long. You know, it's not the tightest thing you've ever seen. script and acting very much included.
If you're gonna hit me hard.
So it's a little stilted, but that scene ends like this.
Come on, get me down, bro. Please, get me down.
And that's pretty much par for the course with this, right up until the final fight with James Liu, which is one of the strangest things. You know, maybe it's taking some tonal cues from Hong Kong action as well. But if I had walked up to the VHS shelf, that venerable VHS shelf that I won't stop talking about, and had gone home with American Ninja 5 for the weekend, it would have been a fine Friday night. Also, it would have been a Friday night for me. That's probably what I would have been doing. How times have changed. Now I make videos on a Friday night. I'm aware that I've made 2 American action episodes in a row at this point. So I want to switch it up. I'm going to break another rule and go slightly not chronologically here and either go backwards, which I'm really trying not to go backwards, and do Once Upon a Time in China 3, which I think I said I wouldn't do because I've already done 1 and 2, but they're so good. That seems like a viable option. Or I'm going forward, and as Mitch has also recommended, we're just going to do Iron Monkey now, finally. So I don't know. That's still in 1993. They're both still in 1993, so I don't think we're losing anything necessarily other than time. That's what it was. I knew there was something I was using or had very little left of. Thanks for hanging out. As always, you guys are great. I don't care if you watch, like, or subscribe. Those are all great pursuits. If you really want to up your game, it's Patreon and Ko-Fi. There's a link not far from where you're at, and you can help me do more of these. And if you do so decide to become a part of that exclusive club, you deserve to have your name up top.